or it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, I did a presentation on the theme, Main Trends of History Teaching in Africa. And in that presentation yesterday, I drew from certain contexts in Africa, such as Cameroon, South Africa, and Lesotho, in order to present a picture of common issues regarding the teaching of history, common trends in history teaching in Africa. So today's presentation is maybe going to be a follow-up on what I touched yesterday, but with a particular emphasis on Cameroon, where I'll be dealing with difficult questions of history in textbooks with regards to the question of the reunification of Cameroon. So there are three important concepts that will be coming up in this presentation. There is the idea of a reunification. We'll also be hearing about the Anglophone part of Cameroon. We'll be hearing about the Francophone part of Cameroon. In order to unpack these concepts, I will briefly say what the reunification is about, and also maybe give us a brief background of the presentation so that we are able to contextualize my presentation. The reunification of Cameroon represents the coming together of the English and the French parts of Cameroon, which happened in 1960 to create the Cameroon nation state that we have today. And this could be linked to the unification of East and West Germany that I'm sure we are all familiar with. So this is a historical context to the reunification, and I'm really going to maybe touch a bit on that. From a colonial perspective, Cameroon is a meeting pot of colonial legacies from different huge ex-colonial powers. We had at one point Germany, that was a colonial master. We also then had Britain and France. Germany actually was the initial colonial power in Cameroon in 1884. And as we are aware, in the course of the First World War, when Germany was defeated in its colonial territories, Cameroon was then partitioned between Britain and France, and ruled first as mandated territories of the League of Nations, and then later on as trusteeship territories of the United Nations. Now this arrangement continued up to 1960, when France gave independence to her own part of Cameroon, French Cameroon, and in 1961, the British also gave independence to the British part of Cameroon, and the two territories, the French part and the British part, then decided to come back together to form the Cameroon that we have now, and the Cameroon that existed under the German times. So that is the idea of the reunification of Cameroon, and the map that you can see there on the slide is an illustration of the partition arrangement. If you look at the map in terms of the red and the blue, that is German Cameroon. In the partition arrangement, when the Germans left, the blue part represents the territory that was administered by the French. You can see that it is a larger part of Cameroon. It is actually 4/5 of the territory. And the part in red is the British part of Cameroon, which is only 1/5 of the territory. And that is why we want to contextualize it to contemporary Cameroon. We always refer to the minority question in Cameroon. The English part of Cameroon is a minority, and the French part is a majority. It's because of these arrangements. So when the two powers decided to come together, it was the coming together of the red part and the blue part. So Cameroon today is this map. And this picture actually also explains the tensions that we have in contemporary Cameroon with discourses of secession and so on. So that is actually the difficult question that we are talking about. So the difficult question is, with all the tensions, with all the controversies around reunification, how is it taught as part of the formal curriculum in Cameroon? How is this very significant phenomenon represented in history textbooks on the Anglophone side and also on the Francophone side? Because the assumption is that each one of these sides have different interests in the Cameroon dispensation. So these are, actually I should have highlighted at the beginning that this study is part of my PhD that I completed in 2018 at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And so I analyzed selected textbooks, history textbooks from the English side and history textbooks from the French side in Cameroon with regards to how these textbooks represent this very significant phenomenon of reunification. So these are the textbooks. On the top side, you will find the English textbooks, and on the downside, you will find textbooks used in the French part of Cameroon. So I'll briefly go to some of the important findings. They will not represent all the findings. They are more nuanced than what you have here. Firstly, I'll mention the fact that the topic of reunification of Cameroon is covered in the curriculum of the two subsystems of education. So you can see that it is there. In the French part, you can see that it is there. In the English part, you can see that reunification is covered. But the difference is that in the English curriculum, and I mentioned there the General Certificate of Education syllabus, you can see that reunification is extensively covered. So it is expected that students from Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, they should know about this event. Students should engage with this event. There's that deliberate intention to promote historical consciousness on reunification in the curriculum, in the English subsystem of education in Cameroon. But the reality is not the same in the French part of Cameroon, because reunification is treated very passively. Actually, it is treated as a non-event. So the question is, why would a very important phenomenon that actually shaped the contemporary society be treated with such passivity in the French part of the Cameroon? So the answer will come in the next slide. The purpose of school history in Anglophone and Francophone Cameroons, especially in relation to the reunification, is to nurture docile learners into the culture of respecting state-sanctioned historical content without any possibility of engaging the content. So this is in terms of the nature of history in Cameroon. And it is a follow-up to what I discussed yesterday, where I said one of the main trends in teaching history in Africa is promoting an uncritical kind of history, a history where learners are not expected to question the content. Because when learners start questioning the content, they become historically conscious, they understand issues, and then they start asking questions which can provoke rebellion and so on. So for the sake of social cohesion, for the sake of national unity, for the sake of peace and stability, all those kind of nice words that the government will always mention, it is important that learners just learn what the state wants them to learn. And learners must not learn how to ask questions. Anything that can lead to very critical mind in terms of history is not really promoted. So the textbooks, and I'm just summarizing them, the textbooks are loaded with preconceived narratives aimed at defining a certain kind of citizenship in the learners through using the text for studying history. And this is especially in the French part of Cameroon. It is not in their interest. The reunification worked to their advantage. There are gaps, there are loopholes in the reunification arrangement. But because it is working in our interest as French Cameroonians, let's not talk about it. But in the English part, it is in their interest to let the students know about it, because we want to solve those problems that reunification caused. And the only way we can solve those problems is by creating that consciousness. Let our students know about what is not happening the way it is supposed to happen. Remember, I'm talking about a situation where the English people are the minority and the French people are the majority. And the English people are complaining about assimilation. Actually, they are talking about recolonization. To say the first colonization was colonization by the Germans. The second colonization was colonization by the British. And after reunification, there is a third colonization, which is a colonization now by their own brothers who are the French Cameroonians, who also were victims of colonization. So it is in their interest to say they have to learn their history. Their children must understand their history as the only way that they can fight this recolonization from their own brothers, the French Cameroonians, at this stage. I'm not sure how much time I have. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, thank you very much. So the two, another aspect that comes out from the analysis of these two sets of textbooks is issues of identity, which is something that I've just mentioned. And we find two kinds of identities which emerge. For the Anglophone books, there is an Anglophone version of nationalism, seems to be promoted in the manner in which different reunification activities are presented, such as a sense of the struggle for British Cameroonians to secure an identity. And I want to go to the French part. Let me just go to the French part. Okay. So the reunification, the representation of reunification in the different textbooks has exposed, this is very important, has exposed the frailty of Cameroon as a nation. So we always refer to Cameroon maybe as an imaginary state. It is really not that nation that people talk about, that people can see that this is a functional state. It is not, it's an imaginary state. It has exposed the idea of different textbooks promoting different forms of nationalisms and identity. One set of textbooks promoting a Cameroonian identity. That is what the Francophone textbooks are promoting. We are one people, while the Anglophone textbooks are promoting an Anglophone kind of nationalism, that before being Cameroonians, we are Anglophones, and we have a specific particular problem within this union that needs to be addressed. This is not something that is happening on the other side. So we see issues of citizenship, we see issues of nationality, we see issues of nationalism, we see issues of identity, different forms of identity that is emerging from these textbooks regarding this difficult question of nationalism. I just want to conclude here by presenting a factual form of historical knowledge on reunification. It could be argued that school history in Cameroon is largely an uncritical discipline with a top-down model of content dissemination. Now, this is something that we have all talked about in the previous presentations. It is top-down, it is determined by the powers that be, and handed down to the teachers, who have to implement it without further engagement or questioning. And they have really no say in the processes involved in coming out with the content, including even in selecting those textbooks. As I mentioned yesterday, the process of selecting the textbooks used in school is highly centralized. Your book as an author will find itself in the system depending on the content, how sanitized is your content that is in that textbook. If it is something that does not stand well with the government, then unfortunately your book will never be part of the system. So it is highly sanitized. And I'm wrapping up. This approach of disseminating the content gives room for government authorities and other textbook stakeholders in Cameroon to infuse certain practices or certain narratives that I refer to here as unpedagogic narratives. And these pedagogic narratives we have talked about in terms of the different roles that the textbooks play. And as a form of recommendation, in addition to the so many recommendations that especially the previous speaker from the Central African Republic mentioned, which I agree with, a review of history curriculum to one that promotes multi-perspectivity, inquiry skills, and sourcing will be a pathway to improve the relevance of history education in Cameroon and make it what some historians call a disciplinary discipline. Now, this is not only important for Cameroon, it is important for, I think, any other country that views history as important and wants history to play the role that it is supposed to, it is expected to play as a discipline. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое. Вопросы у нас. Сейчас микрофон дадут. Я сейчас сначала у нас говорю.
Спасибо большое за ваше выступление. Меня очень интересует вот какой вопрос. Одна из целей исторического образования – это формирование национальной идентичности учащихся. И вот из вашего выступления, из предыдущего выступления мы обратили внимание на то, как важно, чтобы историю школьную, ну, наверное, вузовскую, писали свои национальные историки. Но мне кажется, что еще в этом вопросе очень важен язык, на котором они изучают эту историю. Очень важно, чтобы она изучалась на своем родном языке. Как у вас решается вопрос, на каком языке школьники изучают историю? Вот особенно в Камеруне оказалось два языка, европейских причем. Спасибо.
Okay. Thank you very much for that very important question which has always come up. Now, the issue of language is a very complicated one in Cameroon because we talk about sometimes decolonization of the curriculum, and you find Anglophone Cameroonians fighting for succession because they want to maintain a certain Anglo-Saxon identity. But Anglo-Saxon identity is not indigenously Cameroonian. Cameroonians are not British, right? Cameroonians are Cameroonians in Africa. So how can we say we want to succeed from Cameroon because we want to preserve our Englishness? We want to preserve our Anglo-Saxon identity. Now the problem in Cameroon is the multiplicity of languages. Cameroon has about 300 languages. Unlike other African countries that has one language that cuts across, and you can talk of, in Congo, they talk of Swahili, in Tanzania, Swahili, in Rwanda, Kenya, Rwanda, in South Africa, Zulu, Xhosa, other places they have Lingala. So some African countries has that language that could be used as a national language. It's not the case in Cameroon. You have so many small languages. There's no one of these languages that could be developed into a national language. So for the purpose then of national unity, national integration, unfortunately, we had to rely on that same colonial language, which is what we are still. It's a kind of irony. It's a conflict because we try to do everything away with the colonizer, but at the same time, we find ourselves faced with the only option of using the colonizer's language for the purpose of cementing ourselves as a nation, without which we will not have a nation. Because if we want to say this language should be used, then other groups will start coming up to say, why not our own language? Why not this other language? So we go for a language that is neutral. And the only neutral language is then the language of the colonizers. So English and French are the official languages in Cameroon. Language of government, language of media, language of instruction in schools, and the other languages are used at homes and in informal settings. Thank you very much.
Спасибо. Еще у нас был вопрос.
Я по-русски спрошу. Я заметил, что именно вы очень критично относитесь к многим вопросам и вчера, и сегодня. Докладчик из Болгарии, ее доклад был замалчивание. В ваших словах я чувствую, что есть и в других докладах не та интерпретация. Как только люди начинают говорить, что есть проблема замалчивания и неправильной, некорректной интерпретации, может возникнуть вопрос, это политизация. То есть есть традиционный подход, и как только задаешь вопрос или ставишь вопрос, политизация. Было ли ваше отношение, как вы могли бы определить, где та красная линия, где идет политизация и где идет нормальная постановка вопроса для того, чтобы улучшить и так далее? Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Like I mentioned earlier, that this is part of my PhD, and PhD is definitely not advocacy. So in this study, I'm not doing advocacy, I'm not doing activism, as much as I must also foreground the fact that I'm an Anglophone Cameroonian. So I come from the Anglophone part of Cameroon, the part that is a minority, and the part that is officially marginalized because it is there, it is in the record. It's a problem. There's a war of secession currently going on there, the fighting. But this is also informed by facts. It is informed by evidence. I believe, and so many authors have mentioned, that history should be a discipline with methods, a discipline with approaches, a discipline with procedures, and if it is informed by all of this, then no topic should be a taboo. There's no topic that should not be researchable, even if you have an interest in that topic. So I have an interest in the topic, I put that forward. I have an interest in the topic because I come from that part of Cameroon, but that has no influence in the scientific manner in which I undertake the research to come out with these findings. Because the findings are there in the textbooks, and we all agree as a nation, national memory, that the reunification of Cameroon is the most important aspect of Cameroon history. It is the aspect that brought the two Cameroons together. So if we're talking about Cameroon the way it is now, it is because of the reunification. So there's no reason then why it should not be given serious attention in the curriculum. If it is not given serious attention, then it is our duty and responsibility as historians to ask those questions. And when we ask those questions, we are not doing politics. We are asking evidence-based questions. Thank you.
Еще вопросы у нас есть? Нет? Тогда у нас сейчас кофе-брейк.